Commissioner Reynders, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg. You're in Washington, D.C. You just came from a number of key meetings over the past 2 days, and I imagine top of the agenda has to be what's going on with the transfer of data. Any closer after these meetings of striking a deal?
We have made some progress, of course, because there are many innovative proposals coming from our U.S. counterparts to try to meet all the requirements of the European Court of Justice decision, the ruling of the ECJ in Luxembourg. And I must say that my goal is to be sure that when the personal data is traveling from Europe to the US, the protection is traveling too. And so we have made real progress in the discussions to improve the situation in comparison with the privacy shield that we had before. And of course, we will now assess the different possible legal texts to see if it's possible to go to a new adequacy decision. But it was with real good progress. Of course, our main goal is to enforce the individual rights. Is it possible for the citizens to protect their personal data with a real enforcement of those rights by themselves? And that's the main issue. We have also many other technical discussions, but it's the main concern to have a sort of judicial redress, in fact.
So you made progress, but what are like the sticking points standing in the way?
But first of all, we need to go more in detail in the redaction of different draft legal text.
So this is just broader, high-level discussions right now?
Yes, we have also technical discussions, of course, when it's about the redaction of the text. But first of all, about the principles. When you have an access of intelligence services or other authorities to personal data, is it in line with two principles, the necessity to do that and the proportionality? And so what kind of oversight to see if it's correct, if it's real necessary and proportional? And then, of course, what kind of possible judicial redress or independent body to decide about a redress on the request of the individuals? Because in Europe, you know, we have the GDPR, and so with such regulation since 3 years, it's possible to have a real access to an independent body, a National Data Protection Authority, and then the judges, to ask some redress if it's needed for the citizens. So we try to see, like we have organized with UK after the Brexit, or with Japan or with South Korea, if it's also possible, again, to have an protection system in the US in comparison with...
For the European data.
Yeah.
But the EU has tried twice. The EU has failed twice. The EU courts keep striking this down. What makes you think that the third time will be a charm?
Because we are working very hard, as I said, with many innovative proposals. So it's quite new. We have seen a real effort to come with innovations. And of course, I try to avoid not a third Schrems decision, but a third negative one. If it's a positive one, it will be fine in the Court of Justice. And to be concrete, I have seen Maximilian Schrems again last week in Vienna. I continue to be in contact with all the stakeholders to be sure that we are working in a good direction. And yesterday, with the Attorney General, with Didier Reynders, we have tried to work in such a direction to see, is it possible to fulfill all the requirements of the Court of Justice due to the fact that it's a binding decision, like a binding decision of the Supreme Court in the US. And so that is very clear for both parties. We need to give a correct answer to that. And so, of course, I want to say that I prefer to go to quality over speed. There is no quick fix, but I've said since some time that we need to see before the end of the year if it's possible to have a correct positive reaction and to take the risk to take an adequacy decision and to go forward, maybe to the court.
So potentially at the end of the year we'll have more details on this?
Yes, I'm sure that we have made a lot of progress. And maybe it's difficult to say before a deal that we have a deal. And you know that it will be at the end the own assessment of the European Commission, because at the end it's a unilateral decision to do that. But I want also to say that it's possible to organize a data flow now, because without an adequacy decision, we have so modernized the so-called standard contractual clauses that it's possible for all the companies to use, and certainly the SMEs, to transfer data and to have additional safeguards like encryption to be concrete. So there are already some possibilities, but it will be easier, of course, with an adequacy decision. So we'll continue to work very hard on this.
I want to turn to something a little bit more closer to home for you. And this is, I imagine, top of your plate as Justice Commissioner. What's happening right now with the new rule of law cases in Europe, especially Poland. Just recently, this very contentious decision that basically says laws in Poland take supremacy over the EU laws. What can the European Union do about this?
But we are working a lot in different ways on this since some time. So first of all, we have had some concerns about the independence of the justice system in Poland. So we have introduced again some infringement proceedings before the Court of Justice. And we receive positive reaction. And now there are some decisions of the court, so binding decision again. So we asked to Poland to apply, to implement that, because it's possible to disagree with the Commission, but not with a binding decision of the court. And now we have had a decision of the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland saying that there is a primacy of the constitutional provisions of the Polish constitution in comparison with the EU treaties. And there I want to repeat that the system in Europe is that we have the primacy of the EU law, and certainly on all the provisions, but also the constitutional provision at the national level in the Constitution. And then there is, again, I've said it many times, also in the relations with the US, there's a binding character of the decision of the Court of Justice. So it's very important to all the authorities in all the member states and also in the courts and tribunal to apply the decision of the Court of Justice. Not only to protect the citizens' rights, like we have discussed about data protection, but also for the internal market. Because if you want to invest in one member state, you need to be sure that we will have the same application of the EU law in the entire European Union by all the different courts and tribunals. And so now we are working in the same way to think about maybe infringement proceedings. We have also another tool, and we have discussed that with the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to see how it's possible to use maybe the new tool, the conditionality between the rule of law and the funding of different policies. It's new since the 1st of January of this year, but we are in reflection to use the best tool because it's very important. It's at the core of the union. A real union in Europe, that means the same EU law in the entire Europe.
Is that the tool you would use for the EU to get out of this situation?
Yes, of course. We have different tools at our disposal, certainly in the rule of law to go to the Court of Justice, because if there are some conflicts, it's there, the final place to decide. But also, again, to think about some other instruments that we have put into place, like the conditionality. I have discussed, to be concrete, also with the World Bank about the conditionality mechanism, because in the past, you know that we have organized a link between economic reforms, social reforms, and the funding of different policies in many countries in the world. But we need also to pay attention to a link between such a kind of funding of policies and the rule of law, democracy, and fundamental rights. And if we are not doing that at home, like we try to do now with Poland, it's become to be difficult to be credible when we are speaking out of Europe about the same principles.
And this is very controversial. There was even protests in Poland because people fear that potentially this is the start of, like a Brexit, a Polish exit. From a personal standpoint, how surprised were you from this Polish top court's decision?
I'm not surprised because I said we are at work since some times with infringement proceedings before the court. I've tried to engage a dialogue with the Polish government. So it's a real discussion with one government. But it's true, we have seen some demonstration in the country, but in the different surveys that we have had, 80% of the population in Poland want to stay in the European Union. There's no doubt about that. So we are not in the same situation than in UK from the beginning of the participation of UK in the EU. They were all the time 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But here it's not the case. And we need to continue our work to organize a correct application of all the rules in Poland. And we will do that now with maybe next week important debates. I will go to the Council with the different ministers in charge for European affairs, but the President of the Commission will be in the Parliament with the Prime Minister of Poland to explain again that the pressure will come not only from the Commission, from the Parliament, from the Court of Justice, but more and more from the different member states and also from the civil society and the population in Poland. And it's the reason why I'm traveling now to the different member states to explain what we are doing about the rule of law. We have published a report about the situation in the 27 member states. It's the second report, the first last year, the second one in July this year. Of course, I was in Vienna to discuss on this in the last days, but I will go to Budapest, to Warsaw, because it's important to exchange not only with the government, but with the opposition in the parliament and with the civil society.
And the EU can withhold budget funds because of this. Do you think that is something that could definitely be used as leverage to change the trajectory of this?
For the moment, we try to build the most possible robust file to react. And so it's possible to go to the court. It's possible to use such a kind of instrument. So we are now analyzing the decision of the Constitutional Tribunal, and with the President of the Commission and with some colleagues, we'll see in what kind of direction we want to go. But we are determined to use the best possible tools to do that. Maybe the conditionality.
Would you trigger it? When would you trigger
Oh,
it?
it's a question of days or weeks in maximum. But I've said sometimes.
So you will trigger it. Potentially, Poland will not get these funds.
It's a possibility, and due to the fact that we need to take time to analyze, of course, the content of the decision and to build a very robust, solid argumentation to go to the court or to go to the council if we are speaking about the funding of different policies. And I've said sometimes also in this visit, of course, we don't have the same timeline than Twitter. I know that on Twitter there are some observers saying you need to react immediately to go to the court and in the afternoon you receive a decision. It's not that the rule of law. You know that we need to build a solid dossier before to go to the court and then to receive a positive reaction. But I'm very pleased to see that it's become to be a concern in all the member states and also in the exchange with the US. We have received a proposal of the President Biden to organize a democracy summit, and we will have a first edition at the beginning of December.
Is this Poland case on the minds of
but maybe in the mind of some
US?
European countries, some European partners.
But your U.S. counterparts?
But they have more in mind the events on the 6th of January in the Capitol Hill. And of course, we have seen that we have different problems of the rule of law, democracy, and fundamental rights also in the two parts of the world. And it's very important to think that it's not granted. If you have a very stable and good situation, that doesn't mean that you don't have adverse evolution in the future. So we need to take care, we need to prevent, to discuss also about educational process about that, because you have seen maybe a huge sensitivity of the young generation about the climate change, with many demonstrations also in Europe. But about the rule of law, we need maybe to explain more what is the meaning of the rule of law, such an abstract concept, in the daily life of the citizen. If you want to contest a decision of one authority, you need to be sure that you are before an independent judge.
Right.
If the judge is in the hands of the authorities, then it's a nonsense to go to justice. So we need to explain more what are the links between the daily life of the citizens and the rule of law.
The other issue right now is the EU weighing signing off of the delayed recovery proposals for Hungary and Poland, but with conditions attached, strings attached to these. What in reality would that look like?
But we have decided to put a lot of money with the common debts of all the member states to the recovery and the resilience facility to organize such a recovery in all the member states. But we have said from the beginning, to receive the money, it's very important to have a commitment to organize some reforms, because every year we have a process about the budgetary situation and we send country-specific recommendations to the different member states. I will say it's true that we have still now discussions about Hungary and Poland, but we have already approved many different plans with, in many cases, conditions to say, just to give an example, in Italy, it was needed to reform the justice system, and they've decided to pass different laws before the summer and now in September and October. And it's a real success because they implement the condition. And it's the same in different countries. And so we are now in discussion how it's possible to do the same with Hungary, with Poland, of course, in a difficult period of time.
Yeah, but exactly. You're on the heels of Poland having this very contentious decision. Could that ruling last week delay this approval?
But that will depend on the reaction of Poland. To be concrete, I have asked to the Commission to go back to the court to ask daily financial sanctions for non-compliance with the decision of the Court of Justice. To be concrete, it was to ask to stop a lot of disciplinary procedures against judges in violations of the independence of those judges. It was said by the court. So, of course, if Poland is applying such a decision, it will be easier to make progress in other discussions. But if they are continuing in the same way, it's difficult. But now we are waiting for the reactions, of course, and certainly we'll pay attention to the declaration of the Prime Minister of Poland next week in the European Parliament.
Commissioner, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.